Hey everyone, welcome back to Thriving in Ambiguity, the podcast where we break down the complexities of technology, ideally without losing our minds. Today we're diving deep into public sector IT with none other than Jason Hebbe, who I feel like has held just about every IT leadership position at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Jason, thanks so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to this.
Excellent. So Jason, let's kick things off. You spent over a decade leading IT for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and now you're in a consulting role. Walk us through that journey a little bit. What first attracted you to the public sector tech, and what keeps you motivated in that space after all of these years?
Sure. So, Steve, I spent about 32 years now in information technology in various capacities. Like you said, the past 12 years were in state government with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I held roles such as Chief Operations Officer, Chief Technology Officer, and then finally Deputy CIO before deciding to move on. So interestingly enough, to answer your question about the motivation, I had manufacturing IT, insurance, banking, and in various roles, most of them leadership after I'd say about the first 10 years where I was more hands-on technical. And it was a challenge. I'd heard lots of rumors, if you will, about, government doesn't move at the same pace as private sector. Thought of that as a challenge. It's like, hey, how can we bring some of this to state government and the public sector? So made the jump in 2012. And I can tell you the first couple of years were a little bit challenging. Just learning the nuances of, how procurement worked was probably the biggest hurdle. The technology for all intents and purposes was similar, but yes, they were definitely behind on some of the technologies that they were deploying. And yeah, I just saw an opportunity to serve in that capacity. And over the years, I would say probably within the first 5 years of making that move, just developed a heart for and a passion for public service, just to bring to those we serve, the various business areas, the constituents of the Commonwealth and others, and just their dependency on those services. I mean, anything from public safety to public assistance, licensing, you name it, right? All of those services are key and instrumental for those in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to do what it is they need to do and survive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you because as a resident of Pennsylvania, you've had a great reputation throughout your career, and I really appreciate all the hard work that you've and your teams have put into creating a lot of those great technologies and services that we all depend on.
Yeah.
So thank you
No.
very much.
Yep. I appreciate the kind words. And yeah, so just the final part to that was, why did I transition out? I did so in such a fashion where I can continue that public service. It's just now at a national level instead of just for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I can take all the things I learned, all the relationships I had with other state IT leadership, and just kind of bring all of that experience to bear in helping others, solve for the business problems and things that they're trying to work through.
Yeah, no, that's what's great. And what I found is everybody's kind of dealing with a similar thing, right? And so now you're in a position where, hey, all of that experience, all the things that you've dealt with over the years, now you're able to kind of offer that back to everybody, which is awesome. And it's probably exciting for you too, because it's not the same old nuance every day. Now you get to talk to so many different people in like roles and say, hey, this is how I would have maybe done some of that, and that's probably keeps you energized, and it's always new.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And just a love, as a technologist, just a love of emerging technology, right? It's ever changing. The technology landscape is an eternity as it relates to change. So, just making sure that we're staying current with, AI is perfect example of that. It's kind of a firestorm right now. Everybody's trying to figure out, okay, how do I use this? What do I do with it? And just staying very close to those new and emerging technologies and trying to relate them back to, once again, business problems that they can solve.
hmm I mean, kind of like digging into that a little bit. I mean, how did you manage to bridge that gap between technology and business objectives? Especially, I mean, the stakes are always super high in state government. So how did you kind of work in that space?
So partnerships and relationships, it's really getting out to the agencies and the agency IT leadership, as well as business leadership within the various program areas, and just sitting down. And the conversation never starts with technology, right? It's like, hey, what are some of your pain points? What are you hearing from your end users and those that you serve as challenges and opportunities that you're trying to, work towards solutions with. And sometimes those solutions can be technology, but not always. So really focusing on, the business goals and objectives. When you come into those meetings, especially on the program area side, you're just like, oh, I have this great tool that's going to fix all your problems. There's never any truth in that. You really have to dig in and understand what it is they're trying to solve for. Ask them to show you, like, show me how it works today. And that's, once again, they walk you through the entire process. Sometimes, it's an application or a website that you're walking through with them, and you can look for those, inefficiencies and then work through, talk to them about process improvement, talk to them about where technology can help. And really, at the end of the day, trying to figure out what do they already have in play that you can maybe take advantage of. Budgets are always tight, and you just want to make sure that you're doing the best you can with taxpayer dollars, and making sure that when you're going with that, it's not always like, hey, you've got to buy this new thing. Say you have the tools today, you're maybe just not utilizing them to their fullest potential. So yeah, always focus on the business problems and start with that. That leads to a technology conversation. And that really gives you, the trust that you need so that you continue to get called back whenever they have opportunities. And, that seat at the table is very, very important.
Yeah, now kind of once again, building off some of the things that you just mentioned, there's obviously duplicate tools across multiple agencies. From your experience, what's the toughest part about streamlining an IT portfolio, and how did you tackle the challenges head on, especially like working interagency and trying to like get people on the same page?
Sure. So in 2017, 2018, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania decided we were going to centralize information technology. So up until that point, each agency kind of had their own team that did everything, right? All their application development, all of
Hmm.
their infrastructure support, end user support, you name it, right? Each of the agencies had their own team. 2018, we made the decision we were going to pull it all together, centralize it, put it under one organization, under the Office of Administration. And that's where we'll say the blinders kind of came off, that realization that everybody did things a different way, different software tooling, different, platforms that they were using, things like that. Now there was some commonality, but at the end of the day, there were a lot of tools that, each agency was paying for. We were trying to centralize those budgets, and it was a great opportunity to kind of put all those tools in categories, figure out what everybody was using, understand maybe which ones were best of breed, and then come up with a plan for kind of more universal adoption for those various technologies and platforms and solutions. So that was a very long and arduous task of collecting all of that information, understanding size of those teams and the skill sets in those teams, so that we can make sure as we move forward, whether it's, some cross training while we work towards, standardization, if you will, and common tooling. But yeah, I'd say the biggest challenge was the discovery portion. What do we have? What's working best? Some of those tools were obviously antiquated. Some of them were a little more modern. And, just working with our business partners as well. So the OEMs, the suppliers, as we, did our tools evaluation, and we looked to standardize on those kind of things. The other thing that generated is not just streamlining our support, teams and matrix for those tools, right? We didn't have to have, 6 different people because they each knew one different tool. We were able to leverage economies of scale from our support and administration in providing those services. But the other thing was, each agency to a lot of these suppliers was viewed as a single entity instead of the Commonwealth as a whole.
Mhm.
So our buying power was compromised. So when we went and looked at those toolings and said, hey, if we're all using this and we decide to use this, now the licensing model, we're buying in higher volume, we're going to get better discounts, and we were able to save considerable dollars in doing some of that standardization. So not just on the staffing side and closing some of the skills gaps with the standardization, but even the cost savings was huge when we started looking at the full Commonwealth buying power.
No, and I've worked with a lot of state agencies, and the talk of consolidation and getting that right is always a big challenge for people. And my guess is a lot of it comes back to something you said earlier, and it's really from my experience, I think it's about communication and understanding that business of what they're trying to accomplish. And because you just mentioned it, everybody's doing the same thing, but everybody's doing it their
Right.
way. And there's probably reasons for that. So understanding what they're trying to accomplish as a business, what makes sense, and then being able to kind of lead them together and say, hey, okay, you're doing this great, but maybe we could improve on that. Or maybe you have, shown the best practice and now we can all adopt that. So I think that's probably a big piece of
Oh
it.
yeah, communications was key, right? You need to make sure everybody understands what you're doing. That you don't just make arbitrary changes. You don't make changes without discussing them first. You bring everybody back to the table and say, "Hey, here's show them that picture, right? Show them the before
Hmm.
and the anticipated after, and really focus on the pros and cons." The other thing I'm a huge proponent of is options, right? You don't necessarily have to come to the table with like, okay, we already made the decision, right? This is where we're at today. This is where we're going tomorrow. You say, hey, here's where we're at today, and here's a couple ways forward, right? So then you're kind of bringing them into the fold, helping them, they're part of the decision making process. So you can say, hey, here are the top three options. Here are the pros and cons of each. Here's our recommendation. What are your thoughts, right? How do you feel about some of these? Do you prefer one of the options over the one we recommend, and why? And have those conversations, because maybe we missed something, right? And that goes back to making sure that the business owners and those folks are part of the conversation. You're communicating any changes and moves going forward. Timeline is important, right? You may be stepping on another project that's running in parallel, so you want to make sure that they can say that it's like, well, hey, you say you want to get all this done by the end, the next 60 or 90 days, but hey, we've got these projects that are in flight right now, and a lot of the resources you may need for testing and things like that to help out with this aren't available. Can we push this out to maybe 3 or 4 months? So that, yeah, those are great conversations, and you're 100% correct. Communications is paramount.
Yeah, I mean, I was an IT leader for about 18 years, and as an early leader, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I had made was a lot of times I assumed people saw the vision that I maybe had, and like it's like you're going to implement this new thing, and it's going to be great, and you assume that maybe everybody's going to be on board with that because it's going to solve so many problems. But if you didn't do a good enough job communicating the why and how you were going to get there, boy, you could make a lot of people upset in the meantime. And
Oh,
yes,
yep.
maybe they will eventually, be like, "Oh, this is better." But man, no one likes change. So I think you hit it on the head there.
Yeah. Well, and when you don't include them and things don't necessarily work out the way that maybe they anticipated they should have, that's the perfect environment to create shadow IT, right? So, if agencies
Mm.
feel like, well, hey, we weren't part of the decision, it's not working the way we thought it would, we weren't involved, we're going to go out and do something on our own again. And then you have this shadow IT organization that you have to try and figure out how to rein in later. Whereas, if you take the approach like we were just talking about with, communications, make sure all those stakeholders feel like they have a say, that then, kind of clears the way where you're not risking that development of shadow IT going forward. And shadow IT is a horrible thing to kind of rein in. But at the same time, you understand why they did it. And that's because it was not a collaborative effort, right? You kind of went out and did something in a vacuum, which is never healthy.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about money. Now, you've managed huge enterprise contract negotiations, and you just mentioned how you're able to save, significant amounts of money based on kind of bringing certain things together. For state government or public sector leaders looking to optimize their budgets, what are some of the key strategies and lessons that you learned that really make a big difference?
Sure. So once again, buying power. If you're buying licensing, across various agencies and things like that, try and work out, master agreements with those providers to make sure that you're viewed as one entity, right? We're the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we're buying 100,000 licenses of this thing, right? We're not buying, 20 in this agency and 500 in this agency, et cetera, et cetera. So huge to look at that pooling, and having a good software inventory and those kind of things really help with that. So that's huge. Make sure that you're trying to pull all those agreements up to the state level, if you will, as opposed to looking at them from an agency to agency or program area to program area standpoint. The other thing too is RFPs, they're very complex, they're very time consuming. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes we just lose sight of the fact that the effort put into those RFPs is truly a cost of doing business and should be included in the overall cost of a particular project or initiative, not just, hey, when we finally make a decision and choose a supplier and award a contract, it's that point going forward, hey, here's what we're going to pay for product A and product B, et cetera. So, I think looking at the RFP cycles and understanding where is an RFP really, really required versus where can we use existing, government cooperative buying agreements, because that's huge, because you can get the services that are already competitively bid in almost every instance. So that really, satisfies a lot of the procurement code from that standpoint. So really focusing in on where do I truly need an RFP versus where can I just go out and do this in another way, leveraging cooperative buying agreements and skip that RFP that can, easily be hundreds of thousands of dollars just to execute one of those from start to finish.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, especially, someone's already done the work. Don't recreate it, because a lot of times if they've already done that RFP, you're able to kind of leverage that. So that's great
Yep,
advice.
exactly. And they're typically more flexible too. So at the end of the day, a lot of those cooperative agreements create a lot more flexibility. A lot of times in an RFP, you're very prescriptive in what you're asking for. And sometimes that paints you into a corner. Sometimes that means any changes require significant effort, once again, to add something to the contract or modify something that's in an awarded contract. Where a lot of the cooperative buying opportunities, there's greater flexibility. If you need to pivot, you can pivot more easily, which also saves money, right? We're not getting lawyers involved and procurement professionals involved to modify a contract. We can just pivot very easily because it's already covered.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Next thing I'm kind of curious about is, I'm sure in your career you've had to roll out, let's say hybrid or multi-cloud type solutions. And as different government agencies and CIOs are considering, hey, how do I handle a major migration? What advice makes sense, from your hands-on experience when you're dealing with, because look, it's not all going to go away, right? I mean, we're going to have on-prem solutions, you're going to have public clouds, you're going to have SaaS providers. It's a lot of options for people today. I mean, what's some of the best practices that you look at?
Yeah, once again, I think it starts with that business analysis, right? It's understanding, what do you have in place? Do you have some legacy technologies deployed that need to be modernized, just because, support costs can grow astronomically when you're, trying to keep a technology in play that's long since past its useful life. So really focusing on the business side of things, looking for those opportunities and not doing things like, cloud for the sake of cloud, like, hey, we're doing cloud, that a lot of entities, both public and private, do that. You know, AI is probably going to be the same way, right? It's this big buzzword. How many people are going to just jump into it because it's the sexy thing to do? So yeah, on the cloud side, really focusing on looking at things from a business standpoint, looking at the technologies that are in play, understanding which ones make the sense to go where, right? So, like with cloud, you've got your infrastructure as a service, you've got your platform as a service, you've got your software SaaS as a service, and just really looking at which one makes the most sense. My big thing with cloud and that whole hybrid to cloud approach was, understanding all of the dependencies that are involved, right? If you have something that's on premise, and if you move a portion of it to the cloud, what's performance going to look like? Are you going to introduce latency that's going to cause a poor user experience, for example? So understanding those nuances and being able to come back and say, okay, well, if you want to move this piece, you really need to move the other pieces as well, or you could compromise your user experience or performance. So really, once again, focus on the business, look at those applications, look at the current architecture, and figuring out what makes the most sense for cloud. We really pushed, at the Commonwealth, and I would strongly encourage anybody that's looking at this, if you're going to go to the cloud, like, go cloud native. Lift and shift is I think, a horrible way to move forward. While it is necessary in some instances, once again, maybe you have an end-tier application and part of it just can't go to a cloud native and it needs to be, more of an infrastructure as a service type thing. You may not be able to get away from it completely, but really focus on cloud native technologies, because that's where the biggest bang for the buck is going to come from. Where you get that true consumption model. While you're using it, you're paying for it. When you're not using it, you're not. That flexibility, the continuity and the resiliency that's built into native cloud services is huge. So making sure that all of that's taken into account. So really promoting modernization as a part of move to the cloud. And then from a hybrid cloud standpoint, I think it's also important to note, while all the cloud providers for the most part are similar, there are some differences, and understanding what those are. Maybe you need to go with cloud provider A in one instance and cloud provider B in another, just because of their capabilities are stronger in that area. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then the key is then when you have that and you've got that hybrid multi-cloud thing going on, network connectivity, you need to make sure you have, all the right speeds and feeds there. You need to make sure you have all the security taken into account. That's huge as well. And that all of that can intercommunicate as seamlessly as possible. So once again, you just don't have a bad experience because the network wasn't properly designed. One cloud can't talk to the other, can't talk back, with the appropriate speeds and feeds that it needs for, your private cloud environment. So really making sure that you have a robust, resilient network in place to do, a good hybrid multi-cloud approach.
I love your thought on cloud native because I think it solves a couple things. For one, that most likely is solving some sort of specific challenge, or you're adding some functionality. So there's some piece there. And then the other one is, if you're trying to take that legacy application and move it, there's probably some sort of technical debt or something there, and it's just going to add complication, and it becomes a challenge. So anytime you can avoid that and maybe start fresh,
Right.
yeah, you're probably in a much better place.
Yeah. And one final note on that too. So kind of back to that private cloud, what I would consider, in our case with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth data center, right? So cloud isn't necessarily a place, right? It's a technology, it's a methodology, it's automation, those kind of things. So make sure that your private cloud environment supports all of those capabilities the same way, being able to quickly deploy loads, being able to quickly spin up servers in an automated fashion. So you have consistency and those kind of things. So I think it's also paramount that your private cloud matches what's going on in the public cloud as it relates to automation and resiliency.
It's a great point. Great point. All right, shifting gears a little bit. Let's dive into partner relationships from your perspective. What's the ideal way for partners or OEMs to kind of step up and add real value to the CIO's office? And how do they help, how can they become strategic allies more than just a vendor?
Sure. Yeah. So, I always valued the partners that came in and at least had a good idea of what it is we were trying to accomplish, a good understanding of our current state. So that we didn't always have to start. Like if I had to educate them on like everywhere that we are, that was not always, healthy and efficient. So just have a good idea of, where we're at, understand some of the business problems and challenges. So much of this in the public sector arena is readily available on the internet, right? Whether it's, you've got various websites that track all that's going on within the states, for example. What we're trying to solve. So come in prepared. And then at the end of the day, it's really about building that relationship first. I was never happy about a supplier team coming in and, they were ready with a quote, right, in that first meeting, and they were trying to sell me something. That's not a good place to be. So really, understand where we're at, gain better understanding into, the technology landscape and the things we're trying to solve, really show that you want to be a valued partner, looking at that environment, talking through, what can change, what would the timelines look like, those kind of things before you really start getting into, hey, where's my purchase order? So that's huge. It's really about building that relationship, understanding the challenges, and that can take a long time, right? I think that's the other thing in state government that most people don't realize. Between budget cycles, right? If you're talking to me, shortly after the start of the fiscal year, the thing you would be trying to sell me anyway isn't in the budget. So you really want to establish that groundwork through those first 9 months, maybe, to better understand what it is, where we're at, and then say, okay, we think we have a solution for you. Here's what it would look like. Here's how it integrates and connects to everything else that you've got in flight and in play. And then we can have conversations about what that looks like and making that budget request to move that particular initiative forward. So partnership, communications, be willing to be in it for the long haul and not looking for that quick sale.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I mean, my big thing was always try to find some way to bring value. Don't just come at me with a quote, like you said.
Right.
I mean, that's the last thing anybody wants to see. It's like, okay. And to your other point, hey, strategic plans are online. You know, a lot of people right now are putting AI
Yep.
policies out. Hey, here's what we're thinking. We're trying to navigate this whole landscape, and here's where we're at right now. So if you did a little bit of homework, that helps kind of jumpstart the conversation a little bit where I don't have to repeat, myself.
Right.
I'm sure
Yep.
that's the thing. Time is money, right? Like I don't need to repeat myself every
Very
time
true.
I'm in a meeting.
Very true. Yeah, and you had a good point there too around like existing technologies. Sometimes you may not just be utilizing it to its fullest potential. And your suppliers that have sold you something maybe can help point that out. Say, hey, well, you kind of own this in that licensing model that you already have. All we got to do is turn it on and configure, and that's like a no cost solution, right? They're willing to give you like a systems engineer or something to just come in, get that configured, get it operational, and that's a zero cost solution. So really understanding that existing landscape and where they've already got a presence, if it happens to be a supplier that's already has deployed technologies.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that some CIOs and IT leaders miss. When you do have and have established a good relationship, big OEMs have a lot of resources at their disposal at no cost. There's tons of engineering support in every line of business. There's typically CTO specialists that really are like experts. They may be former CIOs or, different experts in different technologies. And so when you have that good relationship and you're on the same page together and you know what challenges you're trying to solve, you can leverage a lot of that. And like you're saying, if you do it properly, it can really help either, dial in your team to become better experts in the tools that you have, or just maybe doing the research so you know where you need to go in the future without actually having to pay for consultants or some other,
Exactly.
services engagement.
Very true.
Yeah. So looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing state government leaders in the next, let's say, 5 years? And where do you think they'll need to focus a lot of their time and energy?
Oh boy. Yeah. Budget is always pretty close to the top of that list. And I would also say cybersecurity, right? The bad actors, right? That they continue to get smarter and faster, and they find ways around pretty much everything you're trying to do. So it's more than a full-time job to keep them at bay. And there's a significant portion of the budget that needs to be assigned to cybersecurity, practices and things like that, making sure that you're tooling, that it's multi-layered, all of those kind of things, especially as the expanse of, once again, hybrid cloud where you're all over the place. You need to make sure that your security is consistent across all of those platforms. So cybersecurity and budget need to be a huge focus. And as over the next 5 years, I don't think that's going to change. AI, data privacy, keeping an eye on legislation to make sure our technologies are able to meet those needs that are being called out in legislative actions or policies, that you can prove it, that you're in compliance. So those are going to be huge. I would say, AI is going to be an interesting one, and to back up a little further, like the first stage of AI is data management. You got to understand what data you have, where is it, what format, and is it structured, unstructured, et cetera. So that's kind of the first thing. So focus on making sure your data is clean, where it all is. Back to the cybersecurity part, that you've got the right protections, If I'm not supposed to have access to a particular data set, make sure I don't have access to that data set. And as you're doing data sharing, make sure the same thing applies, that any data sharing agreements are well documented. You can prove it. You can run it through an audit and say, yes, this particular application or service only has access to the data that it must have to function, and making sure all that's in place. And then that really sets the stage for good, healthy, AI deployments, which I think are just going to continue to roll out. Everybody's trying to figure out, whether it's, chat generated or it's application related AI, just making sure that the data is secure so that your AI results are productive, really helping to generate time savings and the things that they can do. But I do, I've seen it firsthand, the power of AI and simplifying certain tasks and generating efficiencies, whether it's helping analyze email, giving me a daily summary of all of my email and those kind of things. But once again, just making sure that the security is in place to afford that. So I would say, over the next 5 years, how do we manage our budgets, just to make sure that we're not overspending, we're spending in the right areas, those kind of things are super important. Understanding the run rate of particular services. So this is one of the things that we experienced early on. You might think, oh, well, there's some money set aside to do this particular initiative. Um, but that particular initiative, if we launch it and it goes well, I need the budget monies to continue to run it for the next 2, 3, 5 years, right? So making sure that as you're planning those things out, that those are included in the budget, that you have your run costs included. And then, yeah, cybersecurity is going to continue to be huge over the next 5 years, because there's so many attack vectors with, the moves to the cloud and all the data that everybody has, data sprawl, and data's power. And I think that realization hasn't gone unnoticed, but yeah, it's definitely going to be budget, cybersecurity, you know, data administration, data management are probably going to be the three biggest things I would say over the next 3 to 5 years, and probably beyond.
Yeah. I think you hit on some great points that I'd like to touch on there. For one, when it comes to data, like you said, if your data is not good, all the great things that you think you want to do with it, it's not going to
Right.
work, right? So first thing, you got to have clean data. Next is I like how you talked about AI and how that could be a big difference maker for people, but going back to something you said way earlier in the conversation, I think it comes back to having an actual business need and make sure that's really spelled out. Like, what are you trying to solve for? Don't just do AI for AI's sake. You got to have a plan, right?
100%. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, just along those lines, right? So there are so many things you can do with AI, and the influx of tools that continue to come out that say they use AI and how do they use AI, like just paying really, really close attention to what they are. Because every one of those, once again, additional licensing fees and those kind of things. So to your point, yes, make sure that you're solving a business problem. You're not just doing AI because it's the shiny new widget.
When it comes to security, I mean, I just saw in the news this morning that deep fakes are continuing to get better and better, and it's becoming more of a problem. So as these things evolve, you have to remember, like the hackers and the bad actors, people, I think some people think that they're just some like people in a foreign country in their basement and they're just like doing these nefarious
Right.
things. And no, that's not the case. Like people are coming to work just like the two of us do when and you go to an office or you sit at your desk and you're part of a big, let's say corporation, but in this case their job is to steal people's
Yeah.
data. I mean that's really what it comes down to, and so they don't look at themselves as maybe, like these hackers in a basement.
Right.
That's not the
Right.
thing.
Yeah, it's
So,
not like they always show in the movies, right, where there's somebody sitting in a screen and they get through your firewall and all that, right? It's the social engineering and all those other things that come along with it, and they continue to get creative. Anytime you put one, you slam one door on them, they're looking for the next door or window to climb through.
yep. So it's just make sure, I would say that as you're having conversations, you talk through a lot of those things and stay relevant and stay current on what the new attack vectors are and how you're going to, I would say, educate, because look, most attacks happen to the people working on your staffs, or all, all the people that work within an organization. It's not a firewall anymore. That's too difficult to get
Yeah.
through. That technology's hardened, but you have so many vectors that could come in, and the people that work for your organization is the easiest one to attack.
Sure. Yep.
So, with that being said, obviously thinking it from a CIO lens, like the policies and let's say in how you're dealing with government leaders, what's your thoughts there, and how you're going to handle that piece of the business?
Yeah, so I think, when policies, I do like policies. I think policies are important. Policies are easier to change than law. So I do think that there's an opportunity to make sure you're using policies effectively and efficiently so that, you don't have legislatures thinking they need to make law to protect a certain area, right? If it's already being taken care of through policy, the policies are being followed. You don't necessarily need to legislate, which gives you, once again, greater flexibility, greater ease of response if something changes, which it's inevitable. So the policies, you can very easily revisit them as frequently as you need to and adjust and modify as
Hmm.
required. So I think policies are important and preferred over legislation, but also understand the need for legislation in certain areas to make sure that, once again, there's a level of consumer trust being generated because, hey, this is a law. If somebody does something here, they're breaking the law and there's going to be consequences. So I think that's important. But yeah, around governance, well, yeah, governance and risk, I think, go hand in hand. So we're trying to manage risk at all times. You kind of need governance in place to do that properly. And making sure that you're tracking all of that, make sure that you understand, what governance teams you have in place. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there's a governance team over top of AI, which is huge. Just making sure that every situation, you're making sure that it's compliant. You're giving it a risk score, right? As you're moving forward with things, how you deploy things, you understand what the risk level is. You understand what a reasonable acceptance of risk looks like. And then all of that stuff is very, very well documented. And then, yeah, just keeping track of, to your point, right? The emerging technologies, it's never going to end. Make sure that you're staying very current on those things as it relates to existing legislation or policy that you have in place, because you just don't want to have an oversight in that area and get compromised just because something new came out that you were unaware of, or maybe it came faster than you thought it would. So really keeping an eye on those kind of things to make sure that your governance teams, your policies, everything that's in place is constantly being evaluated against not just current but future technologies.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, really, really great points there. And kind of to close things out, I got one last question for you. So, if you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice that you wish you had gotten earlier in your career, so that maybe you could help somebody out that's maybe just getting started?
Stay educated. It's constant. I've always kind of used the analogy of like a doctor, right? Medical professions constantly changing. There's always new treatments and those kind of things. Doctors are constantly educating themselves. The same thing applies to tech. It's ever changing. It's so rapid. I would say, stay educated. Reading, follow podcasts or trade websites where you're getting constant updates on what's going on in the industry. Those kind of things are hugely important. I would say, specifically, don't give up. That would probably be my big word of advice. You're going to hit hurdles. You're going to hit obstacles. It might be legislative, might be policy, it might be fear of change, like we talked about at the beginning. It could be fear of failure. Well, I don't want to do this because if it doesn't go well, I might lose my job or something like that. So don't be afraid of failing. Sometimes failure creates the best solutions out there. Don't the politics of it all in the public sector. Just kind of do your best to rise above it all, find ways, build those partnerships with the business, other agency heads, your friends in security, your friends in legal. You just want to make sure you have all of those relationships well established, and then just, yeah, don't give up.
No, that's great advice, and it's funny. It just brought back one of the things I used to tell my IT teams was, if it's the right thing to do, then that's what we're going to do. It doesn't matter how hard it is. If it's hard, fine, we'll deal with that. We'll take it one step at a time. But if it's the right thing to do, then let's do that.
Yep,
Right?
exactly.
So I love
Yep.
it.
And then, yeah, just one kind of closing comment. So I just want to kind of go
Sure.
back to the beginning. The passion for public service. Public service is very rewarding. Prior to 2012, before I joined the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I don't think I fully appreciated and understood it all. But it is very rewarding. The people you serve, whether it's internal employees, protecting the lives of Pennsylvania state troopers, the services that you're providing are keeping them out of harm's way. They're keeping the citizens of Pennsylvania out of harm's way, and just that realization that what you do does make a difference, as long as you look at it from the other side and not just, oh, this is a server, this is a network, right? Understand what's happening on the other end of all of that. It's just very rewarding. And I always enjoyed the stories of sitting down with somebody that was directly impacted. Like in my personal life, I'd be out and about and they'd tell me a story, and I was like, huh, those are systems that I'm responsible for. Me and my team are responsible. um, and then along with that, the other thing, great leader stands in front when the bullets are flying, right? So when something goes sideways, as a good leader, you want to be in front of it all. You want to take those shots for your team. It's them that make you successful, and never losing sight of that. When the accolades are flowing, when something goes right, you stand behind them, right? You let them receive all the praise for all of those accomplishments. So those would be two kind of parting points that I just wanted to share.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, and I love that story. I love everything you said there, and it's been an eye-opening conversation. And I hope that the audience here that's watching this is going to walk away with a lot to think about, and how they may be able to apply this, and how they could just kind of think through, and hey, maybe leverage someone like yourself. I mean, you're out there,
Yep,
right? I mean, if someone needs help, or if they're not quite sure to how to deal with a specific situation, that's your world
it
now.
is. Yep, and happy to help. Always happy to help.
Excellent. Well, and for our listeners here, I hope this was a good conversation. If today's conversation sparked questions or challenges that you're facing in your agency, feel free to reach out. Let's keep the conversation going. And for everybody, thanks for tuning in to Thriving in Ambiguity. And don't forget to subscribe, and please leave your feedback so we know what you'd like to hear about next time. And then we could find, or bring Jason back and say, hey, here's what the listeners were saying, and here's what they want to know. So once again, to everyone, thank you very much. To Jason, thank you. An awesome conversation. And I look forward to hearing from you again.
Good. Thank you so much, Steve.